Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. I'm here with Joseph Green. It's a pleasure to have you back, buddy. I know it hasn't been that long since we last talked, but it's good to see you again.
Good to see you, Robbie. How's it going?
You look wide awake.
Yeah, it's a little early in the morning.
I wanted to invite you on to talk about the RFK assassination because I'm trying to get interested in the RFK assassination. It's not hard. It's just I'm so focused into the JFK one. This is a good little break, but also I think it's important to highlight it because it doesn't really get talked about a whole lot. And I'm curious as to why. I guess it was just because they said that they found the shooter or something like that. And I realize that's a controversial take. I've seen some people make statements that Sirhan didn't do it. I'm just curious how you got interested into the RFK assassination as well, too. Was it from the other ones? And also, maybe you can give me a little breakdown of your view on it.
So, the story of this is always kind of the same. I became aware of the Kennedy assassination, or I became aware of the fact that the Kennedy assassination was something interesting to be looked at and not something to be dismissed. And when that happened, which was a result basically of me meeting John Judge and of also writing this script that I've talked about before, um, so that followed through to the other cases. So once I realized what had happened in the John F. Kennedy case, I started to see that there were other researchers that were investigating these other cases into Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. And I was amazed to discover that not only are these all conspiracies, but they all point to the same trajectory in American politics, which is very difficult for me to process at the beginning. And you have to remember too, it's different for people who didn't live through those. So I was born in 1972, so I was not there for the 60s, and so it didn't have that same visceral impact. You go back and look and then go, holy Toledo, like, and then that sort of explains the 70s. Once you look at the 60s, you're like, oh Jesus. um but RFK specifically, there were a number of researchers that were uh there hasn't been that many books written about this particular case in terms of the assassination. It's only been four or five. And the first one, or one of the first ones that was a book, was written by a guy named Bill Turner, who I was friendly with. I met him at the Coalition of Political Assassinations. Actually, I met him at the greatest Coalition on Political Assassinations conference ever, I think, which was in 2008. It was in Los Angeles. And basically, everybody that had anything to do with the Bobby Kennedy assassination was at this conference, including Ted Schrock, who made a great film called The Second Gun, which we could talk about in a minute. But one of the people that showed up was Bill Turner. And in talking to Turner, Turner had been a former FBI agent who had left the Bureau basically because of Hoover's COINTELPRO policies. He didn't agree with them, and he didn't like them, and he quit. And he went to go work as a reporter for Ramparts, which was a great 60s countercultural magazine. And he also went to go help Jim Garrison in his prosecution of Clay Shaw and the Kennedy assassination. And then later got on to the Bobby Kennedy assassination and wrote, like I say, one of the first major books, if not the first major book, which is this one right here, with John Christian, the assassination of Robert. And this is sort of the granddaddy of them. I've got kind of an older copy. And then there were some other researchers that came into it. One of them being Phil Melanson, who unfortunately I never got to meet. Right. Shadowplate, very, very good book, co-written with William Klaber. Phil Melanson is deceased, alas. I never, he was dead before I even got into this stuff, unfortunately. And Bill Turner, unfortunately, is also passed on.
Yeah, that's why I asked you about researchers because trying to look up people, I was looking at it. And whenever you read someone's Wikipedia and says was, I was like, damn.
Yeah, yeah. And I really liked Bill Turner. I wrote his obit for um, Who, What, Why, because I really, uh, I don't know. When I first met Bill, he had Parkinson's, and he moved very, very slowly, but his mind worked just fine. And he was an amazing guy. I don't know. I could talk for an hour about that dude. And then my friend Shane O'Sullivan did a book called Who Killed Bobby, which is very good. He first made a film through the BBC called RFK Must Die. And in that film, he kind of famously made a mistake, which is that he thought that he had seen George Joanides, a CIA agent, identified in the Ambassador Hotel, which turned out to be a mistake. That was not Joanides. He also identified somebody else, I think. But this is, and it was a good lesson, because it's trying to do photo IDs is very difficult, and that's why I don't do it. When people say, well, it's like the three tramps in the Kennedy chase. Does this guy look like this guy? I mean, kind of, but that doesn't prove anything. Like who the hell knows? And the latest book, of course, is by Lisa, A Lie Too Big to Fail, which is also quite good. So there's a number of good books, but like I say, the major investigators at the time who wrote books like in the 70s are gone, but there's still good research being done. And I've done my introduction to the MLK and RFK assassination, which really just talks about all those different books and all the different investigations that have happened. Do you want me to go into kind of the
Yeah, I want to. Well,
details and set it up, or?
I got your interest now, but I'm curious. Like, yes, set it up for me. But why does it get such little press? Is that just because it was announced that it was one killer? It was this Sirhan, and then eventually skepticism started to come out later because there was a certain amount of bullets that were fired that were more than either his gun or it didn't match his gun, something of that sort. But I'm just curious because it doesn't really get talked about a whole lot. And also trying to find a lot of, like, as much as you would have a JFK database, I'm like, it's not just because JFK was the president. I'm sure that plays a part, sure, but he also had his brother killed with the exact same scenario, basically. So I mean, that's suspicious as all hell.
And very hard to believe. And I think a lot of people reject it on that level. They just
Boogie
like,
Losi did. I didn't
you
even
know,
know. I saw that. I was like, oh God, I still
yeah,
can't
yeah,
like you though.
yeah. No, and that's the other weird thing, is that you will have different public figures who don't believe in one but do believe in the other and stuff like that. Um, so with Bobby, they probably thought of it too as an open and shut case, which is the name of another book, which I don't have with me, by Robert Joling and Phil von Prague, which we can also talk about that later because that becomes important. But they called it an open and shut case because that's what the prosecutor called it, and the because it was seems obvious, right? They got a guy with a gun who's shooting, and he was right in front of Bobby Kennedy, so obviously that's what happened. But that's actually not what happened. And the only way to find that out, though, is to get into the details of what actually did happen. So politically, why was Bobby Kennedy important? Well, um, as you know, or as most researchers are aware, Bobby Kennedy wanted to reopen the Kennedy assassination. And right after, and it's also very important to see that Bobby Kennedy was not well liked, like in general, but it's particularly by the establishment. Okay, when Jack was running for president, and when he became president, Bobby was like his hatchet man. He was like the guy, when Kennedy had to make a decision that was unpleasant, or he needed to lean on somebody to get their support. Bobby was the guy who did it. So Bobby got the fight, and so he was, he was a tough guy, and ruthless, and very straight to the point. Like, this is what's happening. I'm going to get this done. And so that had always been his reputation. And then, because of his brother's murder, he's the attorney general, but Lyndon Johnson is the new president. Lyndon Johnson hates Bobby Kennedy, right? Hoover hates Bobby Kennedy. So he has he instantly has no power, right? He's instantly a lame duck as soon as Jack is dead. So he would like to, I think, in the back of his mind is he wants to pursue justice, right? And he also gets an opportunity because of the craziness of 1968. So in 1968, it's the beginning of the sort of dirty tricks campaigns that were played on a lot of Democrats at that time. And the 1968 Democratic National Convention was a huge mess. Like there was literally riots, tear gas, all kinds of stuff, right? And it also was open to a lot of different factions within the Democratic Party who wanted to get rid of, who wanted to support a Democratic leader who would get us out of Vietnam. Like that was a big, big deal. And there's a film called Medium Cool, which I recommend anybody watch, which it's a movie, but the guy who directed the movie, this guy Haskell Wexler, actually went down to the 1968 Democratic National Convention and filmed there and was caught in the riots. And so he's got like actors running around in all this craziness. So but it works as a documentary of what actually happened. It's incredible. In that mess, Bobby Kennedy emerged as a presidential candidate. He had not been at the beginning, but he announced his candidacy late. And in fact, the night that Bobby is killed, he had just won the Democratic California primary. This is June 4th,
Yeah, it was less than
1968.
like a couple minutes later. I think I watched the video of it, and the guy was screaming, "Get him! We don't want another Oswald." And I'm like, that's just like the weirdest fucking thing to say.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's a lot of weirdnesses. So Bobby is at the Ambassador Hotel that night. He announces that we won California. And he looks like a very plausible presidential candidate. And importantly, Bobby can beat Nixon. Right? This is a viable person that can potentially defeat Nixon in 1968.
Did you think it was weird? Like, I watched videos with Kennedy, JFK, and I never saw people shouting in admiration. I mean, you see photos of it, obviously, but I never heard anybody actually scream, Jack, Jack, Jack. But when you see Bobby, that's in the video right before he's shot. There's people going, Bobby, Bobby, Bobby. And it's just, to me, it's like it was different. Like before, it seemed like the Kennedy name hadn't been built yet. And then now after Jack, it seemed like Bobby had like, now everyone's like, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to vote. Do you think people rid the curtails just because it was similar to his brother in some aspects, or do you think he had some individual qualities that people really appreciated?
Well, that's a really good question. Yeah, I think partially for sure that Jack's aura, the Kennedy name, right, that transferred. But also Bobby Kennedy changed, right? Prior to 1968, I don't think Bobby Kennedy would be hanging out with Cesar Chavez. When he did that, when he started getting involved in the migrant workers, he told other people that this had been it's a sea change. He thought about politics in a different way. And he becomes much more of an open personality because, like I said, this guy is a hatchet man who is the guy who delivers the bad news, the guy who strong arms people into cooperating and saying, hey, we need the votes for this and that. And, he did all that stuff. And he went after the mob as attorney general. But he suddenly, it's like he inherits the mantle at a certain point in 1968. And he decides that this is the guy I'm going to be. So yeah, I think there's something to that, and I think that the energy was an energy of hope because so many terrible things had already happened. So besides the fact that we're in the Vietnam War, a president was assassinated 5 years earlier. 3 years earlier, Malcolm X was assassinated. 2 months earlier, Martin Luther King had been assassinated, and there's this incredible footage of Bobby Kennedy getting out of a plane, and he has a group of well-wishers, and it's late at night, and he has to tell them that Martin Luther King has been shot. And he says it's something that sticks with me all the time. He tells them that the crowd, of course, reacts with horror. And Bobby says, I can relate to your horror. I'm paraphrasing, because a white man also killed my brother. I just think that's an amazing way to phrase it, and it seems to stop the crowd dead in their tracks too. That you know, and it's also making this link about the nature of white supremacy. You know, uh, I think it's just an incredible statement that Bobby makes, and so he is that hope. Is there a way to end the nightmare that began on November 22nd, 1963? Maybe. Can we get out of this horrible situation that we're in? Can we get out of Vietnam? This is the guy that can maybe do it. And you got to believe that Bobby was serious because his brother got shot, right? This is not like Bernie Sanders, who raised everybody's hopes, including mine. I mean, I used to really like Bernie Sanders. And
But damn, if that image of him in with mittens with his arms crossed doesn't stick in my head and put on every single Valentine's Day card, I'm smitten like mittens.
well, there you go. It's, I mean, he became a meme, right? Um, because when push came to shove, Bernie is not that guy. And I'm sure he has his reasons. Um, but he's not the guy that's going to. In fact, on foreign policy, Bernie Sanders is pretty well lockstep Democrat, which is to say they're in favor of war on everybody. Since the Clintons got in office. So yeah, Bobby is sort of the last hope at that point of real change, and I think that's why he's got to go, right? So he wins the California primary. He's in this hotel. He's got to leave. So he's going downstairs. He's going through a kitchen area. And when he's going through there, he's talking to a young man, a dishwasher. And that's when he's shot. Now, there's over 100 witnesses, close to 200 people in this pantry in the Ambassador Hotel. Sirhan, this little Palestinian gentleman, is approximately 3 to 6 feet in front of Bobby. Okay. He comes forward. He's holding a gun. He starts firing the gun. A gentleman named Carl Euchre, who was a maitre d', who was holding Bobby Kennedy's wrist. He was like leading him through this crowd of well-wishers. As soon as Sirhan starts firing, Carl reaches out and grabs the guy's Sirhan's wrist, his right wrist with the gun, while he's shooting. Carl, I think, says that Sirhan got 2 shots off before he grabbed him. And he takes that and he starts banging Sirhan's hand on the table. And all the while, Sirhan is pumping the gun. All right. So he shoots. Well, several people are shot, including Paul Schrade, who was shot in the head. And Paul Schrade, he was a wonderful guy. Meeting Paul Schrade, he had like movie star charisma. It was funny. I mean, he's a very impressive person. But anyway, so Paul Schrade gets shot. Several other people get shot. And then the problem becomes that because Sirhan is 3 to 6 feet in front of Bobby Kennedy, the question is, where would Bobby have been shot? His chest, right? His stomach, his head, possibly. But his upper torso in the front is where the bullets have got to be going through. Now, when the coroner, Thomas Noguchi, did the autopsy, he found that all of the bullets that hit Bobby are from behind him. They're at an upward trajectory. And the shot that kills Bobby Kennedy is at contact range, the back of his head, between 1 and 3 inches. This is exactly what Noguchi says. Okay. And the way he knows that is because there's powder embedded in the wound. All right. So very simple. Like I say, there's 100+ witnesses to this thing. There's a guy, the maitre d, Carl Euchre, who's holding on to Sirhan.
Yeah, and he's the one whose clip-on tie is on the floor. That gets cropped out of the photos. So Bobby fell backwards, grabbing a tie. That means Carl Euchre, who's behind him. I know he was never. I guess people suspect him. I've like in previous conversations, who was someone else, Craig Saccone, who did the Dealey Plaza map and everything, was telling me about. We showed photos and everything, did a very deep, thorough, and into the RFK stuff. But yeah, apparently his gun was sold, or he sold his gun, or he said he sold his gun before,
Okay,
and then
you're talking about the guy that is standing behind Bobby Kennedy, the
that's not
security
Euchre.
guard. No, Thane Caesar is the guy that is the
That's the
security
guy.
guard.
Okay, sorry. There's a lot of
Yeah,
interesting names, I should
yeah,
say the least.
yeah. No, yeah, no. Euchre is sorry, my alarm went off. Um, Euchre is the guy that's the maitre d. He's a big German fellow who's holding on to Sirhan. Um, Now we'll get to the guy behind him in just a second, but the the plain facts, right, are that Sirhan is in front about 3 feet. Some people say 2 feet. I think Euchre may have said 2 to 3 feet. There are witnesses that say up to like 8 feet. It just depends on where they were positioned. But anyway, everybody agrees Sirhan's in front. The wounds are all from the back. They're all at an upward trajectory. And they're very, very close to his head. Now, as you point out, there is a gentleman standing behind Bobby Kennedy. His name is Thane Eugene Caesar. He's a security guard who also worked at Lockheed. He worked for Hughes Aviation, and he was a John Bircher. And Teddy Chirac, in his film The Second Gun, interviewed Caesar. And Caesar says, no, I would have never voted for Bobby Kennedy because, I think he says something like his brother sold the U.S. down the river to the communists. So this is the kind of thinking. I mean, the guy's a Neanderthal. He admits that he did pull his gun and he did fall down. What he says is that when he pulled the gun out, that he never got a chance to fire because it was all over by the time he had his gun out. However, because of the logistics of where everybody's standing, Thane Caesar is the most obvious suspect in the world of being the true murderer of Bobby Kennedy. He's in the right position and he's firing a gun, or he has a gun, which another witness did say that he did fire, that he returned fire. But Thane Caesar says that that never happened. And yes, later on, I think Teddy was trying to get hold of Thane's weapon, and he then sold it in this very mysterious transaction, and the gun disappeared and all that. Yeah. So anyway, nobody ever got to look at the gun. And it's kind of amazing that he even because the police at scene never even bothered to question the guy. Like, you have to, if you're doing due diligence, in other words, if this is a real investigation, then you have to interview Thane Caesar. You have to take his gun. You have to compare it to the wounds. You normal ballistics. You do all those things.
Or just make sure the
They didn't
bullets
do any of
match
that.
the gun that's being fired too.
Exactly.
Why did
Exactly.
Sirhan have a gun though?
Well, that's a good question. And it becomes a real problem later on in the case because um, the he spent a lot of time with several people that he was sided with, and one of them was the girl in the polka dot dress, which is how she came to be named, because there was a woman who was with Sirhan, possibly got him the gun. Nobody really knows, but the girl with the polka dot dress, when the shooting happened, she ran out into the lobby and was jumping up and down excitedly saying, "We got him, we got him." And then she disappears from history. And what happens later in the trial of Sirhan is the prosecution produces a woman that they say is the polka dot dress woman, but they have almost nothing in common with each other. So they were both wearing dresses with polka dots, but the polka dots don't match. The women don't match. The lady who runs out in the lobby is a brunette. The witness that the prosecution produces is a blonde. Her name is Valerie Schulte. But most importantly, Valerie Schulte has a broken leg, which she did not have. No one said a polka dot dress lady ran out in the hall with a broken leg, like in a cast, jumping around excitedly. So it cannot be this person. So we don't know what happened. And it's very possible that this is the woman who, with this other guy that Sirhan had been seen with recently, are the people who got him the gun. The gun becomes a problem because Sirhan is using a revolver that's an Ivor Johnson revolver. Okay. That gun is taken into evidence. Again, during the trial of Sirhan, the prosecution produces a different Ivor Johnson. And the reason that we know it's different is because it has a completely different serial number. And the bullets match the Ivor Johnson that is produced by the prosecution, but not the gun that Sirhan actually used. And there was a prosecution witness named Wolfer, who was supposedly the ballistics expert, who does this, who perpetrates essentially a fraud. But the even crazier than that is that nothing happened. Like the judge just kept going with the case. So you have one gun that is clearly identified with, H, blah, 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 whatever the serial number is. The prosecution introduces a different gun and says that's the one that Sirhan uses. Well, the prosecution just lost the case, right? That screws up the you don't have the gun anymore. Now there's this question of what happened. But again, it just plows right through.
Wait, so no one stopped that they changed the gun out, that was just perjury in a trial?
It was never even addressed. This is how you know. So first of all, straight from the top, the LAPD.
Did Boogie Yossi catch it? Was he like, hey, they're doing what I did back with Manson?
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. No, it's the LAPD, which is, one of the most corrupt in the world. And the LAPD's investigation of this thing was horrible. I don't know. Did you get the images that I sent you?
I saw some of them. The couple of the ones I saw in the kitchen with the people lined up, and it showed like a bullet going into the tile and then going down like that. I've seen those before, which I think is weird that both cases have a magic bullet. The most, I just didn't know. I don't know anything really about the court, the trial proceedings. Obviously, Sirhan had another parole that happened as well too. Maybe we can get into that. A lot of the LAPD, I'm very interested in learning more about the LAPD's involvement in it. I know, like, not asking witnesses, but also destruction of documents as well too, much like with the Kennedy assassination with Hume's notes. That's a little bit strange.
They did the same thing.
Yeah.
No, because, and so one of the things that also came out is that Sirhan has an 8-shot revolver, but there are more people wounded and more bullets in the pantry than are in his gun. There are different estimates. I've seen up to 13. But there's a photo. One of the things I sent you was an article from one of the small LA presses at the time, and it shows a photo of the ceiling because the LAPD just got rid of a couple of the tiles in the ceiling that showed additional bullet holes because there's bullets all over the place in this place, and so the LAPD actively destroys the evidence of these extra bullets.
Why do you think the purpose? Do that? Why do you think the purpose of that is?
Well, it's to hide the fact that there are other shooters.
Okay.
There may be, and this was suggested too by a gentleman that I mentioned earlier. So Robert Joling and Phil von Prague wrote a book called An Open and Shut Case. And von Prague is not a researcher. He is, and Joling has passed on, but I think von Prague is still alive. He is an audio expert, and he got a hold of the tape of the shooting, of the audio tape. And so he's analyzing the audio, and I think he comes up with something like 13 shots. But he also says that some of those shots are so close together that they would be best be explained by two people shooting at the same time. So in other words, some kind of crossfire, triangulation of fire, something like this is happening. So who that additional gunman would be, who knows? We just don't know. Thane is the most plausible person to be the guy who actually kills Bobby Kennedy. He's in the right position. He has the gun. He's, he can shoot him in the head. And upward, also important, because Thane says he fell to the floor. So as he's coming to the floor, it's like he's shooting. In fact, one of the bullets went through Kennedy's coat without actually hitting him and just went up to the ceiling. So that's just the ballistic part of it. That's just the logistics of the actual shooting itself, which I would maintain prove that Sirhan did not shoot Bobby. Prove, because it is not possible. And the scenarios to the authors who accept the ballistics evidence and the coroner's report try to come up with ways for, what if Bobby had twisted around and his head had fallen into the gun, absurd stuff. And Carl Euchre, who is right there, he's got a hold of the shooter, of the alleged shooter, Sirhan, and he says, no, that never happened. He said Bobby Kennedy never got that close. He never got 1 inch from Sirhan's weapon. That just didn't happen. Okay, so the closest witness disputes that account. And the coroner proves it. And then you look at what happened to the coroner. Well, guess what? Thomas Noguchi is the LA County coroner, had been doing so for years. And immediately the LAPD fires him. And there's a big to-do. Lawsuits are filed. And Noguchi eventually gets his job back. But this is the response to Noguchi producing an accurate autopsy for not going along with where the LAPD is going. And how do we know that? Because the LAPD, guys like Manny Pena, are destroying evidence as they come in and covering up what happened. So we've never had a good investigation into the Bobby Kennedy assassination because the LAPD is all over it. Another interesting thing about that whole situation is to find the continuity of certain individuals, right? You're familiar with Police Chief Daryl Gates, the LAPD. You ever heard that name? Okay. Yeah, you would have missed this. So Daryl Gates became famous. He was the police chief in Los Angeles from like 1978 to like 1992. But before that, he had worked in the LAPD as an investigator. And Gates had been an investigator into the Manson tragedy, which already is like, oh, that's interesting. And then Gates is a key figure in the investigation of Bobby Kennedy, of the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, right? Gates is also the guy who approved the very first SWAT team in something like 1968. So he's behind that. And he has this, he was also the guy who created DARE. You'd probably be familiar with DARE, the stupid
that worked out
drug thing that did
fantastic, didn't it? Let's just bring a bunch of drugs into school, tell them all the awesome stuff about it, and then never,
That was Daryl Gates' thing. So, and Daryl Gates, the reason he got fired was because he was the police chief when Ron King got beat up by the cops, and he said all these crazy racist things. So that's Gates. So Gates is a tool of the empire, I would argue, in this position. Um, and like I say, anything involved in the LAPD, you got to just be, you're gonna have to look into it, because they do what they're told, and a lot of them are crazy racist John Birchers, probably to this day.
Yeah, when you were describing the one guy who's a John Bircher and all this, I was like, yeah, it fits a deep state profile, don't it? A little bit. I'm just wondering if you think the LAPD is like deep connected into like a government cover up type deal, like with the JFK stuff, or do you think it's more of an aspect of just shitty police work, wrap it up as tight as you can? Because some of the Dallas police stuff can come off kind of like it's super connected, but I think a lot of it's just like they were just shit cops too. Like, everyone seemed lazy as shit and nobody gave a shit about. I probably didn't care about Bobby and probably didn't care about JFK. And that was just the law enforcement back then. But I don't know. I'm looking at a lot of police work now and I go, I just think these are just shitty cops. They're so bad at what they do. And they're purposely doing it too, because they don't want to do the extra work to try and find out the truth, which is interesting that the autopsy was actually pretty thorough, compared to what was going on. I think that's probably where most of the conspiracy stuff comes from, was the guy was like, you can't get it like this. There's no other way. Like they're straight from right behind him, not in front of him.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, and if you want to look at the history of LAPD, James Elroy writes about it in his novels. He's done a lot of work in that area, and he also wrote I think he has a nonfiction about the same thing, but I may be wrong about that.
I know my buddy just made a new book about him. I got to learn more about James Elroy because he wrote a book called, uh, God, oh, it's so good. I don't even think I can remember it. Oh, Howard, I think Howard Hughes. Hold on, let me Google it. No, it's about James Elroy. Okay, here it is. It calls The View from Howard's Fuck Pad, The Deep State, Bad White Man, and the Weird Noir of James Elroy. Eric Wilson is his name. So shout out to him. Yeah, as soon as he said the title, I was like, "Are you fucking serious?" I was like, "That's a great title name. Thank God someone's finally having the balls to put fuck pad on the front of the cover of a book. I've been waiting since I was 10."
I don't know about that, but that does sound like an interesting that
If
sounds
you'd
good.
like Eric, I would get you guys in a podcast go. He's a philosopher like you are. He's been on, I think, 3 or 4 times now. But it's always like how my show is. It's just conversation, so we kind of rattle all over the place. Like he started, I don't know. You just have to listen back to his episodes. You get the gist of who he is. But you guys have similar viewpoints on things. But he does bring up good points about kind of like the cowboy mentality that's in the politics, where it's like you take one of our guys out, we take one of your guys out, like this back and forth that kind of starts to happen, and you start kind of seeing it. And we talk a lot about Watergate because I have different views probably than most people about Nixon, only because when you think of like Richard Nixon, everyone thinks Watergate, and it's like he wasn't the only bad person in that time period. And the fact that history books are only remembering like cultural, I guess the public's perception of like the 70s, if you're not thinking about counterculture, maybe if you actually dive into it. But from what I've seen through talking with people like Abe Peck, who was a part of the Chicago Seed and other underground press magazines that were out there, and learning more about like the Weather Underground, Nixon's name comes up like it's nobody's business and you just can't escape it. And I go, well, I'm sure he did bad. I'm not saying he was good, but to say that that's the only motherfucker in our politics that's doing bad, I was like, I just don't believe it. So it's just like, I don't know. Like I said, I have a different take than most people do on Nixon. But I think it's just because there's just so much going on, and the fact that you only hear like one that kind of resembles out of the whole thing, like even the Kennedy assassination. What about the other assassinations as well too? I never even knew about Fred Hampton, and then I learned about Fred Hampton, had Jeffrey Haas on here, and I'm like, holy shit! Like, there's a lot more going on back then. But that's also another example: shitty police work. And if it was purposely intended to
No,
make sure, well, I mean, that was like more
no,
purposely.
that was an assassination. Yeah, no, because I mean the key thing is that the treasurer of the Black Panther Party, Fred Hampton's good friend, is the guy who put Seconal in his coffee and told the cops where Fred was going to be in the building. So that's it, and they came to serve a warrant at like 3 a.m. I mean,
Are
come
you
on,
wait? Are you talking about
it's
O'Neill?
That is, yeah, that is, what was his first name?
I'm about to say I don't know if the Sentinel thing in the coffee was proven, but I think the main thing is that he just didn't wake up. But I think there's more evidence to kind of support if you're kind of just lining up the lines together that there was something poured in his drink.
Yeah,
You can't have 100 something shots go off and not wake up.
yeah, no, no. He was assassinated. He shot right in the head from
Yeah, two
contact range
two
again.
shots, and the pregnant mother, or his girlfriend at the time, stated that they were up close. A cop went back there, and you heard two pops, and then there hits a photo of him sprawled across his door, in his underwear, which is rough. But yeah,
That's what I argued in an essay. I don't know, 15 years ago now. Wow, it's been a while. Called The Open Assassination of Fred Hampton, because what I've essentially argued is that the cops did not bother to create a conspiracy because he was not a large enough public figure and because he was 21 years old and black. And the Chicago police figured that they would be able to do this thing without, there's no elaborate plot, in other words, in Fred Hampton. We know there were informants because the FBI had informants all through the Panthers. And like I say, one of them was instrumental in murdering Hampton. But this goes back to the elimination of the Black Messiah. That was part of COINTELPRO.
yeah.
So, but yeah, no, the Fred Hampton case. Fred Hampton is one of my sort of big heroes. I'm just
We'll get into that at
astonished.
some point, but we got to stay on
Yeah,
RFK.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. Sorry,
RFK,
yeah,
RFK,
no.
RFK. Okay, so hold on. After, well, why is Sirhan being denied parole still? Like, what's keeping him? Is it nobody just wants to release him? Like, what? How is he in jail been for like what? It was like what, 40 years, 50 years, or something like
Yeah,
that
no,
now?
it's horrible, and I mean, there is no good reason. And in fact, a number of doctors who have met with Sirhan and spent time with him have written to the parole board and said, this guy doesn't pose a danger to society. But obviously he does, because he's this remaining link to a state sponsored assassination. And that's why he keeps getting denied parole. And you also have to remember too that Sirhan appears to have been an MK Ultra victim. But he was doing he was extremely hypnotizable, and he did all sorts of automatic writing. And I don't know if you've ever heard, there's a tape of one of the psychiatrists that is hypnotizing Sirhan and then walking him through the assassination. But he's not asking him questions. He's saying, okay, Sirhan, what are you going to do? Pull your gun out. Pull your gun out, Sirhan. Now's the time. Pull your gun. Pull your gun. And so Sirhan's pulling like an imaginary gun and pulling the trigger. He said, that's right. You got to shoot him. You got to shoot him. Now's the time to shoot. Like that is not an investigation. You're essentially browbeating the guy into saying that he performed this murder. So of course Sirhan's all completely mixed up because of this. And during that trial, the assessment of Sirhan's sanity, one of the guys that analyzed him and said that Sirhan was insane was Jolly West. Big surprise, right? Jolly West turns up all the time. Jolly's like, hey guys, what do you need? And he's there.
Well, whenever their name comes up in that MK Ultra stuff, there's a specific group of people that were involved in MK Ultra. So if their name just pops up anywhere, you have to assume that there has to be some type of involvement with MK Ultra. You don't pull those people out for a random trial or random psychiatric appointment. It's something specific that happens to be MK Ultra related. Do we know where? I mean, was it the polka dot dress? That's a trigger. I don't know. I mean, when you start explaining he's still firing a gun while his hands being slammed on a table, that's a sign of mania. So someone is not obviously either in clear mind, whether it's an altered state from drugs or if it's just an altered state from their psychological perspective, but that's mania right there. I mean, most people react, and when their hand's being slammed something, they don't keep firing the trigger. They turn it to the person and then try and get a good shot at that person to get them off of them, something of that sort. So that means you have someone that is obviously on something, which I'm surprised. Did anybody bring that up as a defense? I mean, you still
Well,
probably would go
no,
to
because
jail even if you're insane. I don't think people are going to be able to detach. Like, doesn't matter if you're insane, you're still going to jail.
there's an
Because
insanity defense, right? You go to the hospital instead of the prison. You go
yeah,
to jail diversion.
but people are still going to be like, you're still the killer of the president, because even if you're insane, it doesn't mean anything. Yeah, just his face is attached to it now. But the fact that the bullets came from behind and that was never explained, and they're saying that it was from the person who's photographed and seen by many witnesses in front, is, I don't know. It just seems like, is it because there's a lack of interest? Nobody's really tried to pry that sucker open and get it. Why wasn't there an HSCA on it? You know what I mean? Like a whole other second
It was
reinvestigation into it.
the HSCA did look into they looked into all the assassinations. Well, they looked into Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy as well. The John F. Kennedy gets all the press, but they did look into those other assassinations, and there was some things pulled out, but nothing. I don't think there was anything that that blew anybody's head off. But I want to go back to the thing you said, because you made a good point that I forgot to talk about, which is the defense. So Sirhan's lawyer at the time was a guy named Grant Cooper, and he was like one of the most famous attorneys at the time. And he had, it's kind of a long, convoluted story that I'm not going to go into, but there was something called the Beverly Hills Friars Club scandal. And at the Friars Club, it was like a gambling parlor, like for rich people to hang out. And they had like drilled holes in the ceiling or something. They were cheating at cards. And a number of sort of big shots, Hollywood big shots, had lost money in this thing. So there was this big scandal and there was this big case, and Grant Cooper was handling that case. And at one point, Cooper, it looks like maybe it's been suggested, and I don't know that this is true, but it's been suggested that Cooper was basically set up, because at a certain point he has documents in his possession that should have gone back to the court. And if he was going to be reviewed by the California law system and potentially disbarred because of this thing that he did. And then he gets the Sirhan case. And the first thing he does in the Sirhan case is he says, we're not going to dispute guilt. We are going to stipulate to liability. That means, so Sirhan never got a real defense. Cooper said, what I'm going to try to do is spare him the death penalty by pleading guilty. So, and the fact of the matter is that one of the guys, like, for example, Dr. Bernard Diamond, who is the doctor that can be heard, telling Sirhan that he needs to shoot the president, is a defense witness. Like, how this guy is a defense witness. But yeah, so that's what happened. Sirhan got screwed.
That's a devil's bargain right there. I mean, would you rather spend your life 50 years gone, flushed down the toilet, being in a penitentiary, or would you rather just take death? I mean, at that point, sucks to say it, but I feel like if you're going to get truth out of the matter, it's better that he's still alive, because you got to think about the damages that he's going to have to be, hopefully. I mean, I get it why people are definitely still fighting for him. It's just hard. It's been so long now. Like, I feel like a lot of people that would have been there, like after Bobby died, did you have a lot of people that had interest in the assassination or trying to look deeper into it? I mean, yeah, see, that's the thing, is like the JFK one, there's a lot of people that obviously had a lot of interest in it. And I would think you would have even more, just because it's like, holy shit, his brother died in like the same way. Another single lone gunman suspected, killer type deal.
You have to remember that people are so, like I said, Bobby Kennedy is the last great hope, right? At least a lot of people think of it that way. So when he's shot, he's dead. That hope is gone. Vietnam will continue. Our national nightmare will continue. Nixon's going to be president. And you've just gotten another demonstration of what happens to people who try to buck the state. So just in the same way that doing a public execution of Jack Kennedy subconsciously tells people, don't mess with this, you're telling them again with the Bobby Kennedy assassination, and all that hope goes away. And there's a lot less interest at that point in pursuing any of these matters, right? That's not the true with everybody. Allard Lowenstein, who's a good friend of Bobby Kennedy, pursued it. Paul Schrade pursued it. There were people who did, but in general, there was a lot less interest in Bobby than in Jack. I mean, if you count the number of books that were written on the Jack Kennedy conspiracy, I mean, it's, I don't know, thousands at this point, a lot. And with Bobby, not so much. The good ones, there's less than 10. Maybe 6 or 7. So yeah, there was not a lot of interest, and there was not, I mean, comparatively, and it was a kind of signal that, we're done, like this, like we've lost essentially.
Was there anything for the RFK assassination for you that you just thought was something you never looked into, or something that just seemed like there's a red herring in every case, I should say. The Tippit scenario is a red herring. It seems like it might be the piece that solves the puzzle, but to me, that one, that brings up more confusion. It's like trying to figure out if Oswald was in fucking Mexico or not. I don't know. I don't want to bother with it. I don't think you need to get people to conspiracy by saying, the whole Mexico deal. But I'm curious if there's anything in the RFK that was more a red herring or something you would consider a lost cause.
I disagree about Mexico, because I think Mexico
Was he there or not?
I don't think so, but I mean, but
that's the thing. Why do you care? That what are we talking about? If you don't know, I don't know either.
Because the government is saying that he was, right? Which also becomes evidence against interest, which is my favorite. Always evidence against interest, right? Is when the FBI report that Oswald does not match this person's appearance or voice even, and so that is revealing the conspiracy, the construct of the conspiracy. They're lying about the fact that he was in Mexico. Well, why are they doing that? Well, they've got these other reasons for doing so, but it is clearly a lie, and even the FBI knows it, right? So that's why I think so. It's not always like every detail about certain things, but Mexico is important because it reveals the conspiracy. So I think that's about Kennedy, about JFK. In the case of RFK, there is, like, you can go way down a rabbit hole with the people that Sirhan was hanging out with, and this one guy called the Walking Bible. And I don't even want to get into it all, but if you read Bill Turner and John Christian's book on the Kennedy assassination, on the RFK assassination, you can get deep into the weeds with some of those folks, which I don't know what to make of a lot of that stuff. It's really weird. And I think Lisa has it. I think it's Lisa that addresses it also in her book, or maybe it's Melanson. Anyway, I haven't looked at this in a while, but yeah, there's some, but there's not the same quantity. There's not, anti-Castro Cubans everywhere and like weird, mob ties and things like. There's fewer of those things in the Bobby Kennedy assassination, and again, presumably because you've got a guy who clearly did it, right? He's standing right there. He's got a gun. Everybody sees him. And there was one more thing I forgot to mention too, very important. The story of Scott Inyart. Scott Inyart being at the time, he was like 15 years old. He's a photographer, and he just started taking photographs a couple of years before. And Scott Inyart is alive today. And posts great stuff on Facebook. He became a professional photographer, has all these great photographs. But at the time, like I say, he was a kid, and he was taking photographs of Bobby Kennedy walking through the pantry. And after he took all these photographs, and he photographed the shooting and all the confusion, he kept, clicking the thing, and used up his roll film. As he was leaving, he was stopped by 2 police officers who at gunpoint took the film away from him. And there was this long odyssey to try and get those photographs back. I think it took a year or 2. He kept petitioning and doing all this. And when he did get the photos back, Um, there was 10 of them missing, all from the middle. So he has pictures of Bobby coming out and then pictures of confusion, but none of the pictures that he took while the shooting was actually taking place has ever turned up. And there's a lot of other crazy things that the negatives allegedly got stolen out of a car on the way to deliver them to, like crazy nonsense that clearly points to a conspiracy. And again, it's just some kids' photographs. Why would you need to steal the photographs? Like why would those be important to get rid of? Well, because they show something else. They show a different shooter. Maybe they show St. Caesar. Who knows? But they don't show what the state says. Because if they showed what the state says, there wouldn't have been any problem with the photographs.
Is there a way to subpoena those, or probably destroyed?
Yeah, you might. I know Scott Enier gave an interview to Black Op Radio like 10 or 12 years ago because I was on with him at the same time. So, I mean, you could ask him. He has. It's a long story. I don't know all the details, but
It's similar
it took
like
him
to like the
forever.
Gail Nix stuff.
Yeah, where there's just endless lawsuits and petitioning and asking and begging and trying to get these things, and the government saying no for a year or two or maybe longer.
So who do you think killed Bobby Kennedy?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, it comes down to this is a state sponsored murder. So, I don't think that finding if there was a co-conspirator with Saint Caesar, I don't think it would necessarily be that important to find out who that is because that guy is an instrument, just the way Saint Caesar is, right? If Saint Caesar shooting Bobby Kennedy, it's not because he came up with this on his own, that I'm going to trick everybody into believing that Sirhan did this thing, or, that's a crime of opportunity. He sees that Sirhan is shooting, so therefore he's going to shoot Kennedy. Like, none of those stories make any sense. Like, he's not going to do that. But we know that he wasn't investigated at all, basically. And the LAPD never took him seriously as a suspect. So that means he's protected by the state. So yeah, we're talking about another government assassination. Whether that is, you want to draw a line from the Pentagon again, from the CIA. I think that those networks all make sense. And they're obviously connected to Operation Artichoke, which is the first version of, or not the first version, but the middle version of MK Ultra. So yeah, I don't think that you need to. I wouldn't say Richard Nixon killed him. In other words, this is a state-sponsored crime.
Usually in like the JFK stuff, you got like mob, you got Dallas police, you got a whole bunch of other ones. I'm just curious because Bobby Kennedy did have a vendetta for the mob when he was under with JFK. So, I mean, I'm sure there's probably a bunch of things, but the amount that is messed up about the whole case, the fact that 10 photos could be missing that would show probably the most important parts of like the actual shooting, and then you're having these weird trajectories, and now you have a person that's been on parole for however long, or has been not on parole, incarcerated for 50 something years.
Yeah, not on parole. Yeah.
So you have a lot of it, and this one's more. I mean, you could actually get answers and be able to help a person's life out in this scenario. I mean, the JFK stuff's more about correcting history, but I'm just curious. You say state sponsored. Do you think any independent agencies, or do you think this could be such a more just unique military industrial complex idea?
I think it's kind of like in a lot of these cases, I think it's like who made the decision to invade Vietnam, right? There's no one person who says that we're going to do this thing, but at a certain point, everybody agrees that this is a good idea. It's like, or when we invaded Iraq, right? I don't think George Bush was the guy saying, "Hey, let's do this." I mean, I'm sure he was in favor, but it doesn't happen because George Bush says this, right? There's institutions, there are organizations that operate with each other, and that make these decisions. And I think it's the same thing, that when you're looking at a state-sponsored crime, it's a mistake to look for the one guy who did it, because it's usually not gonna, by the very nature of the situation, it's not going to be the one guy. Now, you could point the head of the government responsible in the same way in a liability sense, because he's supposed to be my store, and that's fine. If you're trying to look at who actually plans these things,
The technical difficulties, but we were talking about you were mentioning why you don't think that there's just one single piece of this person did it. It's more of a group state effort.
Yeah. What I was saying is that when you are looking at something that is perpetrated by a particular government, a state, you don't usually, you're not usually able to identify one single person who is the prime mover of a particular action. So we may, uh, invade Vietnam, but not because of one guy, right? There'll be different factions within the government. Obviously, the Joint Chiefs are always like a very strong element in this, or the decision to make a treaty with some country, or to do all the various actions that we do around the world. And some of them are, I mean, we know, for example, that Woodrow Wilson invaded Haiti largely because of Robert Lansing and the different sugar interests in America that wanted Haiti to stop competing so well against them. And so we sent the Marines to Haiti. Right? So there are different interests and different factions that are involved in any of these kinds of decisions. So you're almost never going to be able to say, that's the guy. What you can identify are people that are sympathetic and are cooperating and are active participants. But a lot of times these are going to be professionals. So the guy who designs, let's say, the Bobby Kennedy assassination is somebody who's an expert, and it's a group of people more than likely who's an expert at doing this exact sort of thing. So they might be with the CIA, they might be with the Defense Intelligence, but they're all going to be pros. That makes sense?
Yeah. It's just crazy how I don't know, it gets away for so long. You don't think it's that deep when you start. I mean, did you think that the RFK thing, like when you looked into it? I mean, obviously you saw some things that were a little bit suspicious, but did you have the same feelings from when you began to where you're at now, or do you kind of look at this like, did it open up your mind more to the deep military industrial complex? I'm sure the JFK one did that too, but me looking to like the counterculture stuff, I'm getting very interested in, like, it's not just specific people in high positions of power. It's kind of like anything that they seen as a threat. Now, I don't agree with the Weather Underground blowing up all that type of stuff. It got violent when they were starting to put nails and shit. But I look at it like this is also what happens when you repress a lot of people, and also the government and the political kind of ideology or mindset that we see with these deep state tactics is trying to predict bad things before they get worse, or things that are a problem. When I say bad, it doesn't mean that they're evil. It just means things that mess with the original flow or the original plan. And that's what I nobody's in a position of power to be able to predict the fucking future. It's like whenever I hear these people come out with like climate models and like, oh, don't worry, we'll find a new renewable energy in like 20 years. There'll be someone in the future that'll think of like a renewable. I'm like, what the fuck is that? Like, I'm not banking on, I'm not betting the farm on that. That's the dumbest thing in the world. But that's what you see with like, if a Black Panther Party leader or something was going to have a meeting at an apartment building, they go over there and they go, hey, before these people even show up, just say they're being rowdy and try and get them to make sure that they have to cancel, or cops come and have to shut it down before the event even starts. It's like you're predicting that it's going to be this way because you don't want it to happen at all. And like, to me, I don't know, you can't just try and see the future. You're not fucking, what's his name? Doc from Back to the Future. You can't do that.
I think you made a very good point, that the type of capitalism that we have operates at both a micro level, at a low level, and a macro level. So that is to say that when they're trying to predict what the Black Panthers are going to do, this is a very small group. Bobby Seale told me that there was only a few hundred people in the Black Panthers, even at the highest point. But the state took that very seriously, and they wiped them out, essentially, put them in jail or killed them directly. And there was many murders, like little Bobby Hutton. There's a whole bunch of people that got flat out murdered. But at the same time, the same people are trying to predict what's going to happen on a world level. And we need to do this because they're playing the grand chessboard, as Zbigniew Brzezinski called it. And that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. So you're talking about spheres of influence. You're talking about an empire, and you're talking about people who have sufficient power to do whatever they want, or at least they think so. And thus far, they've gotten away with most of it.
And we're gonna wrap just because the technology for you today is not working out so well. I can tell you that much. Get a better Wi-Fi. Come on, everyone, donate so Joe gets better Wi-Fi.
We got the stuff, man. I mean, I've got as good as we can get here in San Antonio. I don't know why it's doing this. It's crazy.
I think it's the worst probably we've had connection wise. Usually we have some difficulties, but it's always manageable. But now your computer's not working and we're going off the phone, and the phone seems like it's going half the speed. But I appreciate the time anyway. We got most of it out of the way before the technology started crapping on us. Where can people find you, Joe?
Yeah, Joe Green JFK, also the Hidden History Center, and Say Something Real Press, and the Center for Deep Political Research, which is what I completely screwed up on in the last interview I did. I was like, I completely brain farted on the last one. So sorry. But yes, Center for Deep Political Research and Joe Green JFK is the easiest way.
And just because I know Rich is going to be listening, we're going to edit out the Center for Deep Political Research. Thanks, everybody, for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank Podcast, and stay tuned for our next episode.